And welcome to another edition of Montreal Hockey Now podcast. I'm your host, Jimmy Murphy, my co-host, Marco D'Amico, and a very, very special guest joining us today, legendary Montreal Canadiens and NHL coach, Hall of Famer, Scotty Bowman joining us. Scotty, how are you?
Pretty good today. Thank you, Jim.
Good to have you, my friend. And Scotty, let's get right into it. I mean, obviously the big news around the Montreal Canadiens right now, and sad news it is the passing of Guy Lafleur. And you knew him very well, and I had the pleasure of coaching him. And I've heard you talk on a couple shows since his passing. But if you wouldn't mind, just talk to us not just about the player that you got to know, but also the person.
Well, yeah, it was. I don't think it'll ever happen again, but you never know. Coming in, coming in when he did from Quebec City as a junior, Canadians winning the Stanley Cup on a big upset, as you know, with both Boston and Chicago in 1971, and with the retirement of Jean Beliveau. Um, and Guy, that was Guy's hero growing up as a youngster in Quebec. He grew up not far from Ottawa, but on the Quebec side, Thurso, and Milltown, and played all the youth hockey. He was, I mean, I think he and Marcel Dion were the same age, and they were both rivals all the way up in youth hockey. They played a couple of the big Pee Wee tournaments were huge in Quebec City. That would be the first time the Quebec City people ever saw him. And then, of course, he went with the Rompards, and Marcel went to Ontario. I think it was that agent Alan Eagleson that got him out of Drummondville, Quebec, and moved him to St. Catharines. But they were rivals, and there was a lot of pressure on Guy to come in, and he was a centerman in junior, although he did play some wing, but he was mainly a centerman. I think his last year he scored 130 goals, which was a record until Mario scored three more. But Mario Lemieux, but it was a lot of pressure, and he handled it as well as he could. He wasn't a media darling at the beginning. He didn't. He was quiet. He always was quiet, and he had 3 years of learning how to play, and the team was getting better, and they won the cup in his second year, and then Ken Dryden left in his Guy's third season, and the team, that's when he started to flourish, I think. And also the fact that Montreal drafted Steve Shutt, an early pick on another team's pick again. They were getting picks from other teams in those years, and Steve came in 73. Bob Gainey came in 72 for Steve. Then Bob Gainey came in 73. I don't think he got in with playing a regular with Steve. Steve didn't play much the first year, and then he took off, and he played with Guy all my for the last 5 years with Montreal from 73 to 79, 78, 79. They played together. I don't recall. We moved a little bit on the center ice. Pete Mahovlich was the center for a while, but then we settled with Jacques Lemaire. And I don't know if Guy ever had another different left winger than Steve Shutt. The odd time he might have played late in the game with Bob Gainey, but not very often. And I read somewhere where Bob Gainey said he had a good seat watching Guy Lafleur because he never played with him. He said 99% of the time he was sitting on the bench watching all the magic. But he had those banner 6 years with more than 100 points, always scoring over 50 goals. So that was something.
That's great. Yeah, I think it was Bob Gainey. I think Scotty. I heard him talking with our friend Mitch Melnick Friday after he passed, and he mentioned Shutt, and he said, Shutt ended up really being sort of kind of a mentor, but more of a really good friend, the good ally that he needed going through those times, and trying to find a way to sort of blossom and come out of his shell, both as a player and a person. So he felt like Shutt was very influential on him. Did you see that too?
Oh yeah, we had the three Hall of Fame defensemen at the same time. So teams had a tough time with both Steve and Guy. They they had good anticipation. We had, of course, those defensemen, Lapointe, Savard, and Robinson. They could put it on your stick, and they blew the zone an awful lot and put a lot of pressure. The other team's defense had to pull out. We had the center line at that time to protect a little bit, but I can not count how many times I can recall. You look up and the puck's coming over the blue line, and it's either on one side or the other, and there's a 2-on-1 or a 2-on-2 or a 3-on-2, and I don't have the records to know how many goals. I think the most unique part of Guy Lafleur, there's a lot of Hall of Fame players that are they're not one trick ponies, but they're either great goal scorers or they're great playmakers. There's a few. Well, you had the great one in Boston, Bobby Orr, who when he came up, the same thing. I was at that. That was my time, and they said, well, he's going to be. I don't know if he can play defense. He may have to play forward, but he was he was a playmaker, and he was also a goal scorer. And Guy was the same way. If he had to put the puck in the net, that was his strong suit with all those goals. But he also made a lot of plays, and that's what I remember about him. Is that most of the teams defended those kind of players with defensive type players. So we had a team that could play offense and defense naturally. So I think another thing they could mention with fellas like Guy or even Mike Bossy, who passed away a couple of weeks ago, that we were 4-line teams. We didn't play just 3 lines. Guy was a right winger on one line, and in the first 3 or 4 or 5 years, Yvan Cornway was right in his prime. He was a right winger, so that was the two different scoring lines, and then we had 2 checking lines. We had Bob Gainey and Doug Jarvis and fellas like Réjean Houle or Jim Roberts, and then we had another line that was more defense than offense, but they were hardworking, Riseborough, Lambert, Trottley. So what I'm saying is, I don't think he had the ice time that some players today might get. They get these generation type players now. They're playing 22, 23 minutes in big games forwards because the teams don't have 4 lines to play regular. Some of the good teams maybe could do it, but it's a lot of 3-line teams. But those players like Bossy and Lafleur that were on those teams that won 4 times in a row, both of them, they didn't get. I don't know. I never had a clock on the players, but I don't think they played 20 plus minutes. I think they were in the high. That's what I think. And they didn't play defense a lot and those teams won a lot. So when you're winning, you're protecting the lead, and they didn't have to go out there maybe and do any checking. The other teams always wanted to play. Boston had a great. And that's what caused that whole confusion in '79. They had a great checker. I think one of the best, Donald Marcotte. Oh yeah, I had a very good one in Buffalo after I left Montreal. Bob Gainey was a cream of the crop, but Craig Ramsey was a great left winger, and really I know even when he was a good checker, and so those players. That's the type of players they had to play against most of the time. Usually they drew the best defense pair. If a team had a strong defense pair, they'd be out against Lafleurs or Bossies and those kind of players. So their stats are not padded. They had to earn them. They played against good defense, and they played against checking forwards. So that's what I always remembered about them. And of course. Lafleur and Schutt. I know Steve. I always remember this, but Steve Schutt, when he started, he didn't play much the first year. The second year, he scored 15 goals. Third year, he scored 30, and then he went to 45, and then he went to 60. Wow, 60. He must have been counting them, but he went every year for 4 straight years, a gain of 15. But of course, Lafleur was right there with him, and Steve was good around the net. He was great at tipping pucks in, but he also he could do one-timers, not the same as they are today, but he a pass across and it's in the net, you know.
Yep. Marco?
Yeah, I mean, wow, this is such a wealth of knowledge. I love hearing of the stories about how he came into the league and obviously, how the team developed because it obviously became an all-star team, Hall of Fame team. Could you maybe speak to us more about, your favorite memories of him, maybe in the room or behind the scenes, something that maybe we wouldn't already we know because we've heard so many of these stories of him,
Well,
with his teammates.
he really, the thing he enjoyed the most after, I mean, I don't know what year it would be, but maybe after he got going, as everyone knows, I just remember it like most fans would do. He was struggling the first year or two, and I thought it was the first year, but some people said it was the second or third. But he took off his helmet, and that was a different type. I mean, there was a lot of players in the league that didn't wear helmets in the 70s. And when you put a helmet on, not that you're a target, but people thought you would be. But it didn't work out for Guy. I don't know the reason. I had nothing to do with it. But he started to play without his helmet. And maybe it was a coincidence, but then he started to really produce like everybody expected him to. But he really enjoyed, the thing he enjoyed the most, he used to want to go on the ice. If we had an 11 o'clock practice, he wanted to go on no later than 20 to 11. Not many players would start before 11. He'd go on sometimes at 10:30, just on the ice alone, put his equipment on. He was always in the rink early, put his equipment on, go on the ice, and just skate around, take shots, go end to end individually. It must have been pretty boring, but he did it. And then as soon as the practice was over, he's gone. I mean, you could just about set a stopwatch. He'd be in the dressing room, no fooling around. I don't know where he was going, but he wasn't hanging around. And he didn't hang around the rink, but he used to like to go to the rink early, 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 2:30, 8 o'clock games, I guess, or 7:30. I don't know, 8 o'clock, 8:30. And that's what I remember is, if you didn't catch him in 5 minutes after the practice was over, if you wanted to do something. So I would always get there, and if I didn't have to do very much, but when I was going to talk to him or talk to the team, I would always do it way before the practice. But he was always going somewhere. He's always leaving the building and on his way. I don't know I didn't worry what he was doing, but that was a ritual with Guy.
Creature of habit. A lot of the good ones are, right? I mean, one thing obviously that has been talked about so much, and rightfully so, is how wonderful an ambassador he became of the team, of the game, and all the things he would do within the community. I mean, for so many stories I've heard lately, he never said no to an autograph from everything I hear. When did you notice, you mentioned earlier about how the first few years were tough for him with all the expectations and everything, but when did you notice Guy outside of the rink start to sort of come out of his shell? Was it in that fourth or fifth year?
I think it was maybe around the 1976, because that was the start of the 4 cups in a row. When we played Philadelphia, they had won the cup, as you know, in 74, beating Buffalo, and 75 beating Boston. And they were going for 3 in a row, and they were tough out. I mean, the games were close. We did win 4 in a row, but they were all, except for the last game, I think it was a 2-goal game. The other games were the first 2 in Montreal were, I think, 3-2, and tough games too, because we had some good tough players, but they were the toughest team in the league, and I think they had a lot of respect for the skill of Montreal, because they didn't pile on. We did have I'm not sure of the year, it might have been 73 or 74. It was a big brawl. It was we used to play, I do remember these stories, but Claude Ruel was my assistant, and they came into Montreal. We used to, as a coach, you don't have any say in who you're going to play at preseason games, and Claude and I would always be talking back and forth. Why do we have to play Philadelphia home and home in the training camp? and of course it was business, big business thing for both teams. But preseason games, and they came into Montreal one Saturday night. We were going to play Saturday at home, Sunday in Montreal, and they came in with a lot of tough. They had tough players all the way through their system, and they came in and they started all kinds of fights. And we put a pretty good team on the ice. And I remember Claude Ruel saying to me, we got this thing all wrong. I mean, why should we play our good players and make them exposed to having to fight all the time? And then so the next night we went to Philadelphia. It was the Saturday night game was very, very a lot of fights. We went to Philadelphia, and I don't remember all the guys' names, but I do know we had guys like Gilles Lupien, who later played a little bit.
Oh,
we
yeah.
had Glenn Goldup. We had a guy named Sean Shanahan. Anybody that could play tough hockey, we put in the lineup. So we went to Philadelphia. I don't remember everything about it. I think the game didn't finish, but we had a brawl. We had a brawl for the eighth. No, we had a brawl, a real brawl. I do remember some of. I knew some of the things because this one player, Sean Shanahan, he played on our minor league team in Nova Scotia. He was a slugger. I mean, he was one of those tough guys. And I knew one of the players on Philadelphia because when I coached in junior 10 years earlier in Peterborough, Gary Dornhofer was playing junior for the Bruins farm team. And he came up as a Bruin, but then he got drafted by Philadelphia in one of those drafts. And Sean Shanahan had a neck hold on Gary Dornhofer right at our bench. And Gary looked up and saw me, and he said, "Scotty, would you get this guy off me?" I mean, and it's I don't know why it happened, but from that game on, we never when Montreal played Philadelphia, that would be in 74, 75. For the next 5 years, we played our game and they didn't try to do any with hockey. I mean, no, we had no brawls or I don't remember every game, but that's a true story that they didn't go after Lafleur and we didn't go after their guys, but we played hockey and we had at that time no intimidation factor in the game, and that's probably one of the things that led us to be able to knock them off.
Yeah. Marco?
I mean, again, listening to these stories, I'm just kind of like lost in the awe of it all. I think one of the things we realized on Sunday was how the memory of Guy Lafleur kind of transcended generations. Like, for example, I wasn't born when Guy Lafleur was playing, so everything that I learned was passed down. A lot of old tapes that I watched with my dad, and so I guess wanted to talk about after his hockey career, and I guess your take on how he was able to become kind of a cultural icon for the province of Quebec and the city of Montreal.
Well, we know that he retired fairly young the first time because he was only 33, and he retired in 83 or 84, and when he retired, he still liked to play, and he joined these legend. There was a lot of ex-players played these legend games, and it seemed that he played everywhere. He was always going with. He enjoyed that part, and then of course he made the comeback 3 years later when I read about it. I didn't know about it at the time. Phil Esposito and their coach from Montreal was Guy not Guy, but Michel Bergeron. They came to Montreal and convinced him to make a return. He sat out 3 years, and I was looking at his. I don't remember a lot about it at that time because I'd left Montreal in '79. So he scored 18. I think he scored 18 goals twice for the Rangers and 60 points or so with not a very strong team, I don't think. And then he went and played 2 years in Quebec City. So that's where he started, and then he made a lot of. He was always traveling. Well, he ended up. I didn't know him at this time because I was gone, but he ended up getting his helicopter license in Montreal, in Quebec. about Guy that's when they started to find his health issues. He was trying to get his renewal of his helicopter license. And I saw pictures the other day. I had driven to Claude Rouel's funeral maybe about 10 years ago. I had driven to Sherbrooke, Quebec, where Claude ended up living. And Guy flew a helicopter. There was 3 or 4 of his ex-teammates, Guy Lapointe, Larry Robinson, Yvon Lambert, they flew in the helicopter to Sherbrooke. So he was quite active in the helicopter, but he went for a medical on a renewal of the license. That might have been 3 or 4 years ago, and that's when they found that he needed the heart surgery.
Yeah.
And of course we know later on they found out this terrible cancer. But no, he transcended through Canada. I don't think he turned down very many. He loved to go and meet people. And, when I had him as a player, he was as quiet a player as he ever had. He was never in the limelight. And he had more in the limelight after he retired. It's kind of a very odd thing.
Yeah. I grew up, I got into hockey through my grandfather, and he had season tickets in the old Boston Gardens, the Bruins games would take me all the time. And obviously he instilled the hate for Montreal Canadiens in me at a very young age. And this is our rival. You don't like them. But there's only one guy you can like. And it was Guy Lafleur. And I said, why is that? He goes, because he's pure class. And, as I got older and my grandfather passed, I don't know, 2001. So he never really saw me get into this business. So when I got into the business, and I'm sure you remember this name, Scotty, I was lucky enough to kind of have Russ Conway.
I know Russ. I knew Russ a long time.
Yeah. So Russ took me under his wing and kind of was my mentor. And I'll never forget, Russ used to get a place in Hampton Beach every summer, and he would race the cars in New Hampshire there. And then he was always on the beach. Always had a different girlfriend. That was Russ. But I just remember one time he says, "Hey, Jimmy, what are you doing?" I was down in my place in Boston, so it's about an hour south to Hampton Beach. Come on up. I want you to meet somebody and go for a few beers. And it was Guy Lafleur. And we just went into this small little dive bar. We were in the corner. There was maybe 3 people in there. And I see this one guy kind of notice Guy, like he's, oh my God, that's Guy Lafleur. And then all of a sudden, he must have gone out and told people, "Hey, Guy Lafleur's in here. Guy Lafleur's in here." And all of a sudden, people start flooding the bar. Mr. Lafleur, would you mind signing this? He signed every single one. And as he would do it, he kept telling the stories to Russ and me, like we were just trading stories. And he just kept signing it. "Nice to meet you." And he'd keep going. It was amazing. It's one of the coolest things I ever saw. He reminded me, Scotty, like I've heard this comparison too. I think I heard it last week. Somebody said it. He's kind of like a hockey version of Paul Newman. You know what I mean? Just had that pizzazz, but that elegance.
He was not. When I knew him, he was a very shy type of player. But after his career was over, and I was very friendly because I had succeeded him a couple of years later, Toe Blake. And when Toe retired, he traveled with our team in the playoffs and spent a lot of time with Toe. And he pretty well put it in perspective, when this would be now when Guy was in his prime, which would be the mid-70s, right till I left there in 79. And for those 5 or 6 years we talked about before, Toe had said to me once, there's been so many great players in the NHL, and Toe actually started with the Montreal Maroons as a rookie.
Yeah.
He was about 23, and he didn't play much in the playoffs, but the Montreal Maroons won the Stanley Cup in 1935. And mysteriously enough, the next year, they lasted 2 more years, 2 or 3. But the next year, Toe left Montreal Maroons and joined the Canadiens. And Howie Morenz had just come back in a comeback from, he went from Montreal to Chicago, didn't do too well, went to the Rangers, came back to Montreal prior to his death when he got injured in 1937 at a young age. And Toe played with Howie Morenz a little, just maybe 1 year. And that's the comparison. Toe said that for his career, playing back to the mid-30s, Howie Morenz if you were a hockey fan and you watched him play, he's a guy that any fan in any rink would be pulled out of their seat watching him play. He was that spectacular. And then he said, the only other players I compare him to, he compared him to the Rocket. He said when the Rocket came on the ice and took plays, pucks in the offensive zone, he just, and then Guy and I saw an interview the other day with Dick Irvin Jr., who did our broadcast, and he said the same thing. And then after that, he said Lafleur. Joe said Howie Morenz. He also mentioned Bobby Hull. He did mention him. He said that these were spectacular individual players. When they got the puck in their own end and they took off, because that's probably the difference in Lafleur than most players in the league. And I'm not comparing players because one was a forward, one was a defenseman. But when you think about Bobby Orr, and people wonder what kind of player was he? Well, I mean, all I remember about Bobby Orr was he'd take the puck behind his own goal, and he's gone. I mean, it's Connor McDavid does it on occasion now because they have that accelerated speed when they start. And Bobby Orr was like Guy Lafleur. As soon as they got the chance to carry the puck, they carried the puck more than most players in the NHL. Because back in the days of the 60s and 70s, the puck was moved defense to wing to center, but the odd guy would be like an Orr or a Lafleur. They'd take the puck, and the other team is scrambling to get back. And even on the goal that he scored in '79 to tie the semifinal series in Game 7, like he started in his own end and he was in full flight. He just made it to the blue line to get over to make it onside. Otherwise, it would have been a 2-line pass. And then that play that he made to Jacques Lemaire was really on. If they had a review of the blue line, Jacques was just about at the blue line, maybe even close to going over when he got the puck on his stick.
John Cherry still says he did.
Well, I mean, it was close, and he took 2 or 3 strides, Lemaire, and by the time he made the strides, Lafleur had skated from his own blue line to inside the Bruins blue line, and I think it was about a 35, 40-foot shot. So, if you look at the acceleration, I mean, that would be the play that I always can recall, and you don't remember it when it happened, but you see the review now, and it's amazing. To me, the 2 goals that they keep repeating, and we didn't see it for a long time, because I was in St. Louis when Bobby Orr scored. I was coaching the Blues in '70, and I bet you that picture, I never saw that picture till the late '90s. And, I remember talking, I still talk a little bit to Glenn Hall. We never talked about that, but Glenn Hall, according to what Bobby Orr said, Glenn Hall would meet him later on and say to Bobby Orr, is that the only goal you ever scored? Because, the two most, I mean, the two most viewed, videos I've ever seen of the NHL players would be the '70 goal by Bobby Orr to win the Cup for Boston, and the conference final goal. That wasn't a Stanley Cup goal final, but it was to get us in the finals. The goal against Boston.
Yeah, it's funny. Going back to Russ. Russ had one of his friends was really into the memorabilia and keeping all the photos and souvenirs over the years. And he told Russ he did a study, and this was about 5 years. No, this was 2000. It was right before Russ died. He told me that. It was in the 2019 Stanley Cup final when they played St. Louis. So it was kind of like everybody kept talking about 1970, and they said that is the most signed photograph in sports history of that goal. Not just hockey, sports history. Because everyone, I mean, you go around Boston, guys. I'm telling you, you go to any bar in Boston, that's on the wall.
I can tell you from '70 to the mid '90s, it didn't appear much. I mean, all of a sudden, I would say it's been appearing now from the mid '90s, and we're talking more than 25 years ago.
Crazy.
In the first 25 years, nobody worried about it,
Yeah. Marco, you got anything?
Yeah, I mean, I would listen to these stories just all day. I think there was one thing that we were discussing during the ceremony right before puck drop. There were a lot of legends in the room. We mentioned 3/4 of them during this podcast, and I think Yvan Cournoyer said it best: is that Guy Lafleur exemplified what it meant to play for the Montreal Canadiens, having dreamt of wanting to play for them, having played for them, having represented them once he finished playing. I wanted to get your take on this, Mr. Bowman. Just basically, what do you think he appreciated the most about being a Montreal Canadian when he was under your tenure?
Well, naturally, growing up in Quebec, and it was kind of like Jean Beliveau played for a team called the Quebec Citadels. Yeah. But the team that took over from the Citadels was the Remparts. So it's very comparable because Jean Beliveau came from a small town, Victoriaville, and went into Quebec City, and that's where he made his name with the juniors and then with the Aces. And that was another thing about Lafleur coming into Montreal is, don't forget, Jean Beliveau played 2 years senior hockey after he was finished junior, and with the Quebec Aces, which was a good league as well. Played a couple of seasons. 1 year he played 3 games and scored 5 NHL goals. But when he started with the Canadiens, he was 22 years old, and Guy started with the Canadiens when he was 20, and he didn't play senior hockey like Beliveau. When he left the Citadels and went to the Aces and didn't sign in the NHL, I mean, everybody knew how great he was. I mean, people that saw him play could say that this is an NHL player for sure. And Guy came up in Montreal, so they very similar backgrounds. I'm sure coming up, Guy was a Montreal Canadian fan. He wore number 4 with the Remparts. Yep. That was his number. In his hero was Beliveau, and most likely with the struggle that he had at the first, I would say 3 seasons, a struggle for a first round pick. Now it wouldn't be the same, but Beliveau would probably have taken a lot of interest in Guy. I never talked to him about it, but I'm sure Guy appreciated the fact that Jean Beliveau had been retired and was in his corner trying to, say, look, time will take care of everything. And because I know the way it works in Montreal, because when I was coaching and we got a lot of young players in that span between 71 and 75, because the year we drafted Guy Lafleur, number 1, we drafted Larry Robinson. I think at the end, it was the first, it was an early second round in those days because there wasn't a lot of teams. But, there was a lot of young players that came in to Montreal, and a lot of them, I mean, you can look back at Steve Shutt's career. You can look at Bob Gainey. He traveled around with, I don't know why, for some reason, other teams were sending their players to the American League. But whether it was Sam Pollock working with the agent, I don't know. But I was the coach, and we would have 3 or 4 of these young players, and they would come with our NHL team. But we didn't. We got a lot of other players, and they didn't play much the first year, as I mentioned. And Toe Blake would come into the dressing room, say they were dressed for the game, played maybe half a dozen shifts. Yeah. And everybody's in their first round picks. People know about them, and Toe would come in and I never knew about it till later. And he would say to the guys, be patient. Your time is coming. It even happened to Yvan Cournoyer, because I was in Montreal when Cournoyer played junior hockey, and he just lit up the Ontario Junior League with the Junior Canadiens. And he came to the Canadiens, and the first year they didn't play him. He played on the power play. He never played regular. He had a whole season of watching the Montreal Canadiens play and Steve Shutt had the same thing. Guy played a little more, but when you think about it, when Lafleur started with Montreal, people wonder what happened. Well, nothing really happened. Yvan Cornway was scoring 40 goals. He was a #1 right winger. He was in his prime. If you look at Yvan's career, he started around 65, and now we're only talking 5 and 6 years later, and he's winning cups, and he's winning cups 60, 68. I think when he first started in 65, they won a cup. 66. He won it in 68, 69. So I mean, Lafleur, when you think about it, we also had Regin Houle. Regin Houle was an early draft pick who was able to become a good shadow. He played against Bobby Hull. Bobby Hull was a great player in those days with the Blackhawks. They were one of the better teams. Blackhawks, Bruins, Rangers, and then Philly a little bit later. And Montreal was playing against those teams. And when you think about it, they were. Guy comes in and he's got to go against Phil Esposito's great face-off guy in Boston. Bobby Clark was always one of the best in the league. Jean Rattel was in New York. Stan Mikita was in Chicago. That's probably what happened. He couldn't get face-offs. I mean, if you're a rookie coming in the NHL in the last 4 or 5 years, and you're playing Boston, and you're a centerman, 20 years old, and you're going up against Patrice Bergeron, and your record is like 2-8 or 2-10 or something. It's not easy for him. So I can see the transformation with Guy. It was too much to play center in the NHL. Jacques Lemaire and Pete Mahovlich were already Stanley Cup winners with the Canadiens. They were centermen, and they weren't going to change. We weren't going to leave them ice time. It was really a tough time for them. But we had.
That's a good lesson. That's a good lesson for the kids coming in today. I mean, because the league's gotten more skilled again, and I'm sure you see it all the time, Marco. I see it with fans on social media saying, "Why won't they play the young kids? Why give them more time?" It's a project. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
And if he's a centerman, like the Blackhawks, I don't have much to do now with them, but I know one of the players they drafted hasn't come around, an early pick.
Kirby Dach?
Is Kirby Dach.
Yeah.
And, his biggest problem is face-offs are in the 30%, and he hasn't been able to, and maybe even more so now, because possession, when we see the overtimes and that, face-offs are so important that if you start with the puck, it's hard now. If you have the puck and you got a skilled team, and the other team is trying to get it off you, you're getting those hooking penalties, you're getting the stick penalties, and possession. So a team that's going into playoffs with a good edge on face-offs, to me, it's got a hang of an advantage.
Yeah,
and we're going to see it next week. You're going to see it. These teams that have a good edge on the face-off dot, and Kirby Dach's the best example. He hasn't developed yet, and one of the problems that they see with him is that he doesn't get face-offs. And I mean, they want him to be a center, but I don't know if they're ever going to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm with you, Marco.
Yeah, well, we were talking about that with Nick Suzuki in Montreal for the longest time, because he was he was 40% on the dot up until recently. Now this year he's worked his way to 49%, almost 50%, and it shows because he has more possession, and Kirby Dach is a possession center. Like, he needs the puck on his stick. So does Suzuki, and now that he has the puck on his stick more often, all of a sudden he's at a point per game pace over the last 35, 40 games. So I 100% agree. And I think, Jimmy brought up, the patience, and you talked about bringing a lot of youth in the 70s. I mean, I counted, I think, 15 first-round picks in 4 years. So when it comes to Montreal, I guess, they're going to have a younger team. They're going through kind of a retool, a rebuild. When you see players like Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, do they remind you of the young players that you had under your tenure, and how would you go about positioning patience in their development?
Yeah, the toughest part, the temptation when you get good young players, if your team, I mean, wins and losses are still the one barometer for it. Doesn't matter what team you're with. And when you get these young players and the team is not strong, and they have to suffer through the growing pains of being a young player, I think it's a lot more difficult for those players. Time will take care of itself, but until the team gets to be able to win 2 out of every 3 instead of 1 of every 3, it's going to take time. And those players, they lose confidence. And I think it was easier. It was tougher on the individual player, but easier to join a winning team when every time, like you're just another player trying to make it. But now when these young players start in Montreal and they're going to get these young draft picks, the pressure goes on them, and they're going to have to know that if the team isn't winning, it's going to be a focal point, and it's not easy.
Yeah, especially in that market. I mean, what do you think of Nick Suzuki as a player, Scotty?
Oh, I mean, for his size and that, I mean, he was a we all know that Las Vegas got in the finals the first year, and maybe that's the worst thing ever happened to them because the bar is so high.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they knew he was going to be a player, but at the same time, when you get into finals, and one of the worst things that happens to teams is when you get into the Stanley Cup finals and one team wins. There's nothing worse than being in the finals and you're now like a second loser, really, or first loser.
We would know.
And that's what I think happens, with these teams. Suzuki, there's a lot of pressure goes on a young player, but he's started to have a tough time at the beginning of the year. But if the team gets better, it's going to make it a little easier for him. So it's not easy for young players to join teams that have a tough time winning. And because I don't care what kind of players they are, if they're good players, they want to win. And that's something that's when you need to get, it's hard to build a core. The hardest part now is to build a team on draft picks. You're going to draft, and you're going to, you look at teams like Detroit now, they're in their 7th year. They finally got their hands on 2 really good young players. They have some in the pipeline, but you also have to draw some free agent players. Detroit's a good example. They've got a lot of cap room, but they don't want to give when you're going after these free agents, especially when they're say in their late 20s or early 30s, and the one thing they want, if they come from a good team, they want to win and they want to get term. And a lot of these teams got to be careful, because if you start giving a 31, 32-year-old player 5 years, you got a good player for 2 or 3. How are you going to improve the last 2 years? You're going to have a player that can't play anymore.
And so you're going to have that cap.
No form. Yeah. I think the retool and the rebuild is so difficult that probably have to sit down with Gordon, who did it with the Rangers. He was there when they made some tough trades. Imagine they traded Ryan McDonough. Right now, they would love to have Ryan McDonough. He got a good team anyway. The Rangers have rebuilt their defense, and they, signing Trouba and getting their hands on Fox. They got a pretty, and K-Andre Miller is a good young defenseman.
Yep.
So maybe you could say they're not missing McDonough, but they had to make some tough trades. They had to trade good players, but the ones they got back, maybe not as much as McDonough, but they did it with signing free agents, like Panarin. They got some of their own young players coming in now, and I think that's the way that you have to do it. You're not going to do a rebuild on all young. You're not guaranteed to be like there's the first or second pick overall you want to get, but
Right.
you don't even have that guaranteed because there's a lottery. Like Montreal and Arizona, I think they're tied or something. But I don't even know what the situation is this year. I heard it's just one player, Shane Wright, but I don't know how good he is. But I don't watch those players. But I can see that Montreal or Arizona, one of them is going to probably get the number 1 pick. Maybe there is a number 2 pick too. But like you look at Buffalo. That's the best example. They missed out on McDavid and they missed out on Matthews. I mean, they got players. They got Eichel and they got other players, but they're not McDavid and they're not Matthews. They're generation type players. I mean, they may not come around. You may not get a Matthews or a McDavid for 10 drafts. We don't know that. I mean,
or next year.
Pardon?
Well, they could get the guy next year is supposed to be pretty good, eh, Connor?
Connor
Bedard.
They always say that the guy next year is going to be, but no, I know what you're saying. The scouts feel that way, but it's a tough. I don't think you can rebuild. I mean, you got your fans to worry about. If you're gonna say we're gonna have a lousy team for 5 years, I don't know how you. I mean, it'd be interesting to see. You're gonna see it happen in the next 2-3 years because the one team that hasn't tried to hide it is Arizona. They got a ton of picks. I don't know how many picks Arizona have, but it's many, like it's like 9 picks in the first 3 rounds or something. The next couple of years, but are they gonna have enough? Are they gonna be able to stay in business and have a decent team till they get all those guys playing? I don't know.
It's interesting we talk about this, right? Because what was one of the things that he said already? He's on record as already saying we are going to be active in free agency, and I'm thinking,
is that Montreal?
Montreal, yeah. And I think it's because Scotty, you brought up a good point. You can't just have all these young kids. You have to have some kind of sort of middle core there of 25 to 30-year-olds that can mentor these kids and take off some of the pressure for them. You can't just put it all on them at once like that.
Well, even thinking of the Lafleur years too, the best teams in the early 70s, Montreal, when they won the Cup in 71, they were the 3rd best team during the season. They weren't even the first 2. But the thing, when they got all those young players coming in, they still had, back from winning teams, they had Lapointe and Savard. Dryden had just come in. I don't really count Dryden because he just came in that 1 year. They had Lemaire and they had Cornway. So they had 4 fairly good young players. There weren't enough to carry them, but it definitely, as you look in time, as these young fellas like Lafleur and Robinson and Schutt and Gainey and Riceborough, they wouldn't have been able to be as successful had Lemaire, Cornway, Lapointe, and Savard not been great players for them. They were now in their mid-20s, mid-28, 29, and that's what you need to do. And yet, to be a destination is something. Maybe Montreal, with the fact that there's a lot of history going back to the Rocket and then Belleville and now Lafleur. This thing with Lafleur, I'm sure that ceremony they had, and they're going to have more ceremonies for next week with the viewing and the funeral. And if you're a young player in Montreal and you got I'm sure those young players that are going to make it with Canadians.
Marco wrote about this. Yep.
They're going to. I mean, they got enlightened by how popular. They never saw Lafleur play, and they can understand maybe didn't. Pardon?
They can understand it now, though.
Now they've seen it. They've seen this ceremony of fans cheering for 15 minutes for a man that's 70 years old that passed away. And that may help them, because when you have tradition on your side, it makes it a little, it's never easy. I'm anxious to see the dynamics in the next 5 or 6 years for all these teams that are right at the very. There's about 5 teams at the bottom now. They're at rock bottom, and you see it by the standings. And like even a team like Buffalo, they've had a tremendous month and a half. They're going to end up with maybe nearly 80 points.
Yeah.
Now, you still need 98 points or 96 to make the playoffs. That next 8 wins is going to be, and when you look at a team like Buffalo or Detroit, I mean, they got some young players, and I'm sure they're going to make a good dent. But you got, if you think about it, you got Tampa, you got the Panthers, you got Boston, you got some real Toronto. These are not. I mean, there's some young players on these teams. So it's how do you if you're Detroit and you're Buffalo, how do you catch up?
That's a great question. I think Boston's going to go down a bit. I think it's inevitable. I feel like it's. But you know what? I've been saying that for a couple of years now, and they
play the game.
If Bergeron leaves, it's a whole different ballgame.
But Jimmy, Boston played a game in Tampa. I go to all the Lightning games.
Oh yeah,
they played a game about
Friday
2
night
3
one,
weeks
right?
ago. 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they didn't. They surprised people. But the 2 players on the team. The 2 players on the Bruins that game, and I don't see them play a lot, that impressed me because it went into a 3-on-3.
Yep.
Taylor Hall, and I saw him play 4 years ago when he was in Jersey and they got beat by Tampa. And he was a one-man gang. He won the Hart Trophy that year. And Taylor Hall and DeBrusk in that game against Tampa, and Tampa has quality players up front, especially, when you go through all these guys. They were right there. Like, when you really, you can judge players now when you get to 3-on-3. When you get to the 3-on-3, you see speed, you see players that can have confidence to make the right play at the right time.
Yeah.
And I was impressed with Hall, and because they made some moves that maybe a week or somebody. DeBrusk went in, Pasternak went down with Hall,
he flipped.
and Coyle.
Yep.
And the other guy, DeBrusk, went up with Bergeron and Marchand. So they showed that line, like they were not a one-line team that night. For one night, they had 2 lines. And if Hampus Lindholm, if you got a defense, if you got Lindholm and you got McAvoy, and they're not that, they're gonna get at least 5-6 great years out of them. I don't know what else they got in the pipeline, but they got something going.
Yeah, so it is. It's definitely hard for these teams, Marco.
So wait, if you go to every single Tampa game, I did have one question in this regard.
Sure.
Were you at the last Montreal Canadiens versus Tampa game that went to overtime?
I did go. Yeah.
Okay, so this is where I wanted to bring this conversation. So this season has been very difficult for the Montreal Canadiens, and since Martin St. Louis came on, they've had far more of a fighter's mentality, a comeback mentality, and that game was very much a comeback game.
They showed up to play that game. I didn't know any of the players, but the one player that I was watching, because it was his first game, he was even on the ice when it was 3-on-3, was Harris, Jordan Harris. I don't know much about him. Yep. He's a college player from Northeastern.
Yep.
But I don't know where he is right. I mean, is he still playing with Montreal or no?
Oh yeah, he's a rookie. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but they came to play that night, Montreal. They showed. I mean, I was waiting for them to really fold their tent. They didn't fold the tent that night. The goalie played a pretty good game. I think it was Josh Allen that night. He kept them in, and that's a game that Montreal could look back on and know they did show up to play that game. But they got to sort through a lot of players.
Yeah.
It's funny you bring that. You bring up Harris there. I mean, Marco is really well. He knows a lot about all the prospects coming up, and that's one guy that Marco's been waiting for a while. And he, I know. You must know Jimmy Madigan, right, Scotty?
I know him very well. Where he's from.
Yeah, so I mean, he helped recruit him to Northeastern, and now Jerry Keefe's the coach there. But this kid's good. I like him. I think he's going to be good. And they got a couple.
He had a good head on his shoulders that game. But the thing that I noticed about him,
first game, right?
Foot speed.
Yeah, that was his first game.
he didn't take a back seat in that. They put him on the ice. They had him on the ice 3-on-3, which I was shocked. But
they had two rookies.
He did okay.
right.
Justin Barron.
Then they had another kid. There was a scuffle near the end, and this kid Barron, I don't know where he came from, but I think from Colorado. He's a big, strong kid. He pushed hard in a scrimmage, you know. And I said, they may have something with some of these young guys.
Yeah. What do you think the job Marty St. Louis done, Scotty?
It's not easy to go in. He's a positive guy. I think if you know, the NHL has such great coaching now, but you know, there's people on the teams. It's not a one-man show, and like if you get a coach that's a motivator or one that's personable, and then if he has to add a technician that can work with specialty teams, or you got somebody who can work with individuals. So you're talking about like people wonder, why is there 3 or 4 guys behind the bench? Well, it's pretty hard to get somebody that's maybe good in all areas, you know?
Yeah.
So I think the important part of coaching in the NHL now is the staff. Like there's some really, really experienced, it's hard to believe the experience of coach. I mean, like Washington's got Peter Laviolette. He's been a winner. You know, you got Barry Trotz. You got Mike. You got Cassidy in Pittsburgh. I mean, the young guy's done a great job. Rod Brindamore. He's a terrific coach. I don't know what his staff is like, but you know, there's a dozen coaches in the NHL for sure, more than a dozen maybe, that if they get the right mix on the team, you know, there's some good coaches that are not head coaches, and they're probably never going to be head coaches, but they're good tacticians. They're good with the defense core. I mean, I saw it in Montreal because we were one of the first to have it. Maybe Philadelphia did too, but I saw how much our young defense core improved with Claude Ruel. He was a teacher on the ice. He loved to go on the ice after practice. He loved to stay on. He didn't like to give discipline to the players, but I had him as a really great teacher. I'm sure Larry Robinson would be one that comes to mind. He was a player that was going to be a good player, became a Hall of Fame player. I mean, give him credit. But Claude Ruel worked tirelessly with shooting pucks at defensemen, how they play the point, how they block shots in front of the net. And, you know, you get coaches that are going to teach, and you're going to get young players. They're going to get better.
They'll buy in. Yeah, for sure. Mark, you want to do one more here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still, I want to guess to the point, bring it back to Guy. I guess one of the last things that we touched on basically was the post-career and what he did for the hockey community. So I guess I just wanted to get your final take on what you feel, you know, the biggest moment that you can remember of him after his playing days were over, if you have any.
Well, I didn't speak to Guy for 2 years, verbally, but I text to him quite a bit, and I have it on my phone here, and this is probably the one memory, and probably the most difficult part for Guy would be the last maybe 2 years. I'm not even sure about 3, but the last 3 years, knowing how personable a person he became, not being able to go and see people and talk to people. It must have been just, not the way that anybody would want to do it. But I sent him a note. They put my name on the Verdun Auditorium with Denny Savard, and I sent him a note. I always send him a note. It's funny because my birthday is September 18th, and his birthday is September 19th. And I said in last year, very happy birthday for you, number 70. Sorry I missed you last week in Montreal at the celebration, because that was when it was at the Verdun. I said, all the best. And he said, he texted me back, right away. He said, "Thanks, Scotty. I'd love to go and have lunch with you guys sometime. That's my next ambition. Take care and wish you and your family lots of health." So then my last communication with him was on March the 9th. It's only not even 2 months ago. I said, "Guy, congratulations on the Order of Hockey in Canada. I hope and trust I'll be able to see you in June at Niagara Falls for the induction because I live 30 minutes from there. Félicitations, Scotty Bowman." And he said, "Thank you, Scotty. I hope to be there too." That was on March 10th.
Oh,
So, these are tough times, eh?
yeah,
And that's that. But that will be on my phone forever,
yeah.
And I
That's
mean,
awesome.
I think that's the tough part with Guy is his last 2 or 3 years. Because he wanted to be with people. That has been the toughest part of all. I know some of the players went to see him. I do know that. I know Steve Shutt did, and I understand Ivan Cornway and Serge Savard is very close to him too. But those were a close-knit group of people. Larry Robinson, and even Ken Dryden's in Toronto, but they keep up. And Dryden put it, he said, and he's quite a writer, but he said, when you're the best of the best, it's something. And that's what he referred to Lafleur as, the best of the best, which was that's coming from a teammate, and I just I wasn't able to speak with him, but I was always able to text, and right away as soon as I text, he answers it.
Yeah, that's the type of guy he was. Well, you're the same way, Scott. I always appreciate that about you.
Thank you.
I'm telling you, Marco, sometimes I'll text Scotty and just ask him some advice or what do you think of this guy? And boom, right back. So it's a good quality to have. I appreciate it. And Scotty, we thank you for joining us here today.
Thanks, guys.
Scotty
Thanks,
Bowman.
Marco. Bye.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure.
Bye.
Have a good one.